What is intelligence? Because I regularly hear people talk about emotional intelligence and practical intelligence and social intelligence, etc., as distinct forms of intelligence, which are separate from and yet somehow synonymous with intelligence and equally valuable. Now, when I say the word intelligence, I'm not pointing to some scientific or technical definition. I'm pointing to a real thing. And that just happens to be the only word I know that describes it based on my understanding. My understanding is that intelligence is reasoning capacity. And reasoning is the ability to recognize patterns, evaluate evidence, and construct valid inferences, and identify contradictions, and thereby solve novel problems. If that isn't what it means to you, then you're talking about some other quality. You just happen to be using the same word. Not every desirable quality is a form of intelligence. If the definition of intelligence is expanded until it includes fundamentally different phenomena, or if the definition is reduced to superficiality or appearance, the word doesn't point to anything real. We can no longer meaningfully talk about the capacity for solid reasoning because now every conversation about intelligence is an endless, unproductive semantic loop over what intelligent even is. And this is reification in action. People are just abusing the hell out of the word intelligent because they think the word is a thing and not simply a pointer towards meaning. The fact that people have the tendency to reify abstractions makes it easier to steer public opinion in a specific direction by manipulating definitions. This can be done by repeating specific phrases in the public space, which people will eventually take for granted and repeat themselves, even when they don't make no damn sense. These phrases are designed to reinforce relativism and reification in the desired direction of belief. It's a method for subtly shaping your worldview by getting you to say and thereby internalize and believe things that you've never applied critical thinking to. They do this using fallacies, which have been identified as fallacies precisely because they're common cognitive errors. In other words, people have an inherent tendency to accept them even though they're not true, which is useful if you're trying to lie. It's the sneakiest form of propaganda. I like to refer to this process as casting a spell. And the propagandists are sorcerers because it metaphorically matches up perfectly with the concept, right? A series of magic words are spoken which enchants the target with an illusion so that when they look, they see what the spellcaster wants them to see. And you become a thrall of the sorcerer, like unwittingly working their will. And I'll give you some examples that relate to how we define intelligence. Knowledge is a form of intelligence. False. This is a simple category error. Knowledge is memory, and memory is useless without the ability to actually understand. You can have a photographic memory, memorize every line in your textbook, graduate, and receive a degree, all without actually understanding any of it. An unknown but no doubt disturbingly large portion of scholarly degrees are for sure handed out to total nincompoops with good memories. Last I checked, the IQ of the average doctor was roughly average. Where's your degree? Are you an expert? Having a degree doesn't mean you'll be correct and honest in all your claims, and it doesn't prevent personal bias or corruption, and they don't actually give out degrees based on intelligence, despite common belief. A degree doesn't magically impart infinite perpetual validity. That's what we call an appeal to authority fallacy. Yeah, he's intelligent, but he's not wise, or he doesn't have any common sense. Wisdom is good judgment. You can't have good judgment if you don't have good reasoning. Wisdom may come with age, but you're not going to be wise even if you're old if you're a doofus, right? If your judgment is poor, then your opinion about other people's judgment isn't likely to have much of a relationship with reality. They might very well understand something you don't. That's what makes them intelligent. When people reference common sense, they're usually talking about ideas which they take for granted to the point where they don't even need to justify them, even to themselves. In other words, they're things that they believe without reason. This allows people to treat intelligent people like they're actually idiots, because they don't come to the same conclusions as your average person, which is frankly ridiculous if you stop and give it 2 seconds of thought. If your interpretation of common sense is everybody knows, that's a bandwagon fallacy. If it's this authority says, it's an appeal to authority fallacy. If it's consensus says, it's an appeal to authority and a bandwagon. If it's none of those, you define it for me because I don't get it. He may be intelligent, but no emotional intelligence. If the definition of emotional intelligence is recognizing and managing social cues, then doing that accurately and usefully still requires actual intelligence. Otherwise, you're just talking about elevating emotional arguments to the same level of validity as rational and intelligent arguments. Slapping the word intelligent next to the word emotion doesn't make emotions intelligent. And it doesn't mean that emotional arguments and rational arguments have equal footing. You still have to have good general reasoning skills and be able to justify your feelings because you could be mistaken or manipulative. Knowing whether or not emotional arguments are honest and true makes all the difference when it comes to whether or not sympathy is even warranted. I have no reason to feel sorry for you if you're full of crap or actively lying. Not only is the phrase emotional intelligence not intelligent, it's downright dumb. And forcing people to accept emotional manipulation by framing them as cruel or uncaring if they don't isn't empathetic. It's presented as a moral position, but it's exactly the opposite of moral. It's actually kind of heartless and shitty. It allows manipulators to dominate the conversation, and it shows a complete lack of empathy, specifically for people trying to have integrity and be unbiased and fair, which means not using or accepting appeals to emotion. Appeal to emotion is a logical fallacy because it doesn't do anything to prove your point. Fallacies are not some special kind of intelligence. That's absurd. Not everything is logical. No, not everything is logical, but the domain of logic is that which is real and true. Things that are not logical are also not true and not real. They're fiction, entertainment, delusion, or deception. Simple as that. You're too intelligent for your own good. You tend to overthink, as opposed to them underthinking. Give your brain a rest, because intelligence and insanity are closely linked, which actually seems to be true, but I'm not particularly surprised, considering how often they have to deal with condescension and gaslighting. You'll drive yourself crazy thinking so much. No, you're going to drive me crazy if you keep saying that, or at least people are going to believe I am, whether it's true or not. A smart person sounds like a crazy person to a dumb person. Ignorance may be bliss, but being a simpleton isn't the same thing as being sane. People tend to treat logic as egotistical because to them whether or not logic is even a valid concept is a matter of opinion. You just want everybody to believe what you believe. No, not really. I want everybody to operate in good faith so we can all learn something. Logic isn't my opinion, and it isn't a human invention. It's the operational rule set for reality. The study of logic may be flawed, but it's the only player in the game, and it invites meta-analysis. If our axioms are wrong, we can reason about that and fine-tune our perception. There is no competitor when it comes to discernment. You think you're so smart, or you think you know everything. What does that have to do with the conversation? Obviously, people can be condescending or rude, but people can also just say this to avoid addressing the point in favor of a character attack. Either way, it's performative morality. Even if they are condescending, address the point. Acting like you don't even need to bother and talking down to somebody is also condescending. Make your argument and prove them wrong. And if you can't, then concede the point like an adult, instead of being a sensitive, egocentric hypocrite. All these qualities that people want to elevate to the same level as intelligence are actually all better performed by intelligent people. Having intelligence helps you perform almost any task better than you would otherwise because you can comprehend what's happening. That means a whole lot of people are going to be tempted by jealousy. Insecure people can't tolerate appearing or feeling inferior. And simply being in close proximity to an intelligent person requires a degree of humility. They're probably going to be correct in their conclusions more often than you and think of all kinds of things you didn't think of and outperform you at all kinds of things you thought you were good at, which doesn't look good with regard to your social power relative to theirs. Also, you might find out that your worldview is fundamentally flawed, which may cause some cognitive dissonance. So you'd have to make too many concessions, experience too much uncertainty, and show too much weakness to interact with them in good faith. In order to preserve your own position in the hierarchy, you have to manage the perception of their authority in some way, and you can't operate in good faith because that automatically gives them the advantage. You may respect the intelligence of people outside your social circle, where the power imbalance is irrelevant to your daily life, but if someone you personally know or are in direct competition with is more intelligent than you, and you have narcissistic tendencies, you're likely to do everything you can to make them appear crazy or less intelligent than they actually are, which can be relatively easy to do using gossip or gaslighting, and of course spin, like these phrases. And all the fake-ass psychological conditions you can label intelligent people with to try to convince them and everybody else that they're mentally handicapped is just a bonus. Spells seem to work best when they're direct inversions. Exactly the opposite of the truth. Always accuse your opposition of that which you yourself are doing, because it's confusing and difficult to argue. All this bullshit automatically puts a target on the backs of all intelligent people, which is most tempting to those in closest proximity: parents, siblings, close friends, co-workers, etc. And the more prevalent narcissism and relativism are in the group, the more likely it is that they'll all work together to belittle or downgrade the intelligent person in some way. Even those who are less narcissistic, let's say, go along with it because of the story that's being spun. And all this can happen without any of them ever consciously acknowledging or understanding what they're doing. However, there are also, for sure, some absolutely horrible people out there who know full well what they're doing and are doing it 100% intentionally. So the intelligent person might develop defensive or condescending or withdrawn or frustrated attitudes in response to the treatment, which will then be cited as evidence to support them being arrogant, crazy, or mentally handicapped, which justifies the treatment, and back around again in a self-reinforcing gaslighting loop. The narrative we all operate under regarding intelligence is designed to absolutely destroy intelligence and intelligent people. Also, our standards for justified authority don't have to include actual intelligence if we can't even work out what it is. So we're bound to end up with some absolute cartoons running things, which looks to me like what we've got.